Bitcoin's trading within $3,000 and 4% of a new all-time high. So is this a bull trap or a legitimate breakout? That's what we're going to uncover in today's video, giving you everything you need to know about the stock markets and Bitcoin at this stage of the cycle. Smash up the like, subscribe if you haven't already. Now we've got a ton of analysis to get through, but I thought this is the best way to start off this video, especially with a lot of the markets not hitting new all-time highs for a number of days, weeks, maybe even coming up to a month in the case of Bitcoin, and we're at 26 days now. But this quote goes a very long way, especially in cryptocurrency, when everyone is looking for something to do every single day. There's got to be something going on. From the legend himself, the market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient. Now, we don't have so many different edges when you've got a lot of institutions getting into the game. What they don't have is the patience. If you can develop that in your own game, have some sort of patience, I think it is so underrated and has the power to return many, many multiples. So this is one of my favorite quotes. It's one of my edges I've found over the last several years, is being patient with the market. When everyone wants it to do something, just wait for the signals to come up. The market will tell us when it wants to do something. All right, let's kick it off. Let's kick off with the S&P 500 as we've continued for the US stock markets to follow along with this correction from a new all-time high price. Now, I put out the last video looking at Bitcoin entering one of the biggest stock market corrections in over 6 months. And of course, Bitcoin hasn't had a new all-time high in the last 26 days. So one of the longest periods since the ETF correction. So as an update for the S&P 500, the NASDAQ and the Dow Jones, we're now sitting 6 days underneath the previous old all-time high and down 2.66%. The previous longest streak that the S&P had run was 2.88% to the downside and 14 days until it reached a new high price. And in that case, it was a new all-time high price. Now, with these stock markets, our view has been that we're going on a grinding uptrend with the everything bubble, prices skyrocketing, asset prices going up, and the majority, the masses, even hedge funds and other big players are waiting for bigger corrections, and they haven't got them. That has been the case for now nearly 6 months, with single-digit corrections all the way up for the S&P 500, for the NASDAQ and the Dow Jones. So what we've seen also on the NASDAQ is 12 days down from the all-time high, 3.5% down now from that all-time high. And the previous biggest correction and longest time frame was that correction around the all-time high when it just broke out in January of this year, or mid-December, and then the January period as well. So that was 4.84%, 14 bars or 14 trading days to get to a new all-time high. So what I'm looking at here is the possibility of this slowing, grinding effect for an extended period of time, as we've looked at with the March-April period, potentially into May or June, depending on what comes next, of course. But looking at this period as being maybe a pause or a slight correction for the stock markets. If that is the case, well, that's obviously going to affect Bitcoin as well, as it's something that we've covered with the Bitcoin price. When the S&P 500 shoots to new all-time highs, the past has shown the S&P 500 has broken into new all-time highs. That's caused a bit of a rally on Bitcoin. We've seen that this time as well. Obviously, the ATHs are here, but just looking at the chart and the flow of money, S&P 500 ran up in 2019. Basically had a bit of a sideways grind. Bitcoin also ran up. It had a pullback, roughly 50%, but it was a 300% run up at that stage. And then the S&P went on its final leg here. COVID happened, and then it came back to test a new all-time high price, which was then what we now know, I should say, the 2020-2021 bull market for Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. It's happened before. We've seen it in the past, looking at 2015 into 2017. Now, we've gone through this on the channel before many, many times, which helped us identify the lows for the market. We saw a rough 9-month low and then a 6-month reaccumulation for Bitcoin, which is why we're on this mega run now. There was a long time of accumulation that occurred in 22 and 23, which has led to the market conditions that we see them now. The largest correction that it's had since that October low, let's get it onto the daily chart here. We're at 3.7% to the downside, and we're into our 6th day underneath the old all-time high. The previous record, if we can call it that, was 12 days underneath the old all-time high, 2.1% down from a peak. So we definitely have the largest peak now since October, which was the Israel and Palestine war. We're seeing more flare-ups in the Middle East, and that was again 6 months ago. So the main thing I'm looking at here when it comes to the stock markets is if this is going to be a continued grind, a pause, a correction, not a collapse, then we might see prices also stall or basically trade within a trading range for BTC, as we'll have a look at in a moment. I understand that sounds crazy for some. Even if the price goes a little higher, we'll cover that for Bitcoin because we've seen that sort of thing happen before. So in the short term for the Dow Jones, above the 50% is stronger, below is weaker. That's the thing we're looking out for here to assess whether we're going to see higher prices sooner. That's why it says strong and shorter, or weak and longer. So if it stays underneath the levels, then you're going to get a drawn out period, which means the market is slightly weaker. You've got a 50% bounce already from this particular correction. So there's the low, there's the high, and the market has dropped dead on to that 50% level for 2 days now. So if it starts to break down from that level, then we would have to reassess and pull this trigger, pull the 50% level further back to see what happens next with the Dow Jones. Overall, we're still in a major bull market, everything bubble, macro bull market. We're not getting any sort of major collapses here. But another reason for this particular correction could in fact be the CPI news coming out this week. The market's waiting to see what happens there with inflation, but they're also adjusting their positions around the interest rates. Now, you've heard me talk about this many, many times before. This is I've posted this in January, where there was basically a cut every single month. And the suggestion I made for this particular post here on Twitter was that it's probably unlikely that we would see cuts every single month because of how bullish the markets are. You're not going to see cuts when the markets are racing away to new all-time highs. Like it doesn't happen. And if it does, it's very short-lived because that spurs on the enthusiasm even more. And so they have to raise the interest rates again. And so this was the January post. You can see there were cuts almost every single meeting. And now we're down to 2. That was the big news yesterday after we'd gotten where there was 3 interest rate cuts. And then finally, if I can find, here's the post, that now there is only 2 interest rate cuts. You can see here, 5.5 down to 5.25 down to 5 for this year. But we're also starting to see more shifts to the right. So there might not even be cuts, and maybe the market is trying to price in or start to get more familiar, more comfortable with no interest rate cuts and maybe an interest rate rise, which was very different to what everyone believed at the beginning of this year. And basically that's what I've talked about here in this post. Even if that is to occur, I still think the markets are going to go up from there because the markets are going up even on the back of interest rate rises. And if we saw it again, depending where we are in the cycle, I think the markets are still going to go up from that point. As we can see here from Seth, if matters, this is for interest rate cuts, it matters little if or when the Fed cuts. So essentially, this is just looking at the history of them, going back to the 70s in this case. Rates can be hiked, rates can be cut, the markets will do what the markets do. It is a fallacy to believe that when interest rates are cut, that means something is broken and the markets have to go down from that point. It's not entirely true when you look at the data. I don't know where these other people are getting their data from to say that when the Fed cuts rates, the markets collapse. We've proved it time and time again. But of course, everyone's going to choose what they want to choose. So we've looked at this, cuts, no cuts, pauses, whatever. The cycle is up. The charts are showing very strong ground to the upside, even with gold also hitting new all-time high prices. We've also seen new fresh prices for silver as well, hitting $28 an ounce. So there's a lot going on in the markets with asset prices increasing, as stock markets are also increasing, as interest rates are pausing and might, I don't know for sure, I'm not the Fed, but they might also increase. We've also seen or in the case of metals, we've seen them rise in the second half of the real estate cycle, last cycle. 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, gold and silver were going up. Real estate was going up. stock markets were going up. And if crypto and Bitcoin were around, I would imagine they would also be going up at that time. That leads us to Bitcoin and crypto, and essentially what you came here for, as we've got a background now about the markets, what's going on there. Bitcoin surging. Is this the end? Or are we going to see further breakouts? Is it a bull trap? Essentially, the news doesn't really say much today. I think they're all trying to come up with another reason as to why Bitcoin is going up. The halving's less than 12 days away now. Maybe that's a particular reason why we're still seeing prices with some activity into the prices. But essentially, Bitcoin is slightly dropping off at the moment. The target that we're looking at least in the last several days, probably a few weeks now, was 72,500, which is this white line here. So we've touched that target, but it did not close above there. Did it get it on a 4-hour? No, just closed slightly under that level. And on the daily, we closed down at 71,600 with the market still correcting at the moment. That was a key level. That was the gotcha bar. We've talked about that multiple times, so I won't go into it again. We got to that level, but the closes haven't been there yet. So now we're in this next little no man's zone, no man's land between the previous tops and that key level of mine here, which was $72,500. So it's doing everything possible to climb higher, but not giving any confirmed signals that it is going to keep breaking higher for an extended period of time. It depends on your own time frame. I'm just going to look at the shorter term stuff here. The 4-hour chart, it's got some closes above those levels, so that's a good sign. We've got some uptrend happening here, at least in the short term. As for the daily chart, we got a close $100 underneath that previous peak there on the 27th of March. So it's doing everything in its power to climb higher, but it's not giving us those confirmed signals of strength to get to those next prices for a sustained period of time. Now I've got price targets to the upside should we break this high to let us know whether this is going to be a sustained move higher for a longer period. We're talking weeks and months, not just days, like what we've seen in the past with previous tops, especially at these levels, especially with extended periods of green months. So very nice, strong moves to the upside. Essentially, closes above the all-time high is going to be the first business here for BTC. So closes above 73,800. And then it's got to get through the 50% level here, $78,400. That's the level I'm looking at for now based on the chart itself. So the low to the high projected off the low, 50% there is at $78,400. If Bitcoin fails at those prices, 78 and then 81 here, that could lead to downside again. It needs to get through those levels to show the strength, consolidate to then push higher. Otherwise, this is all going to be the same story that we saw in the previous cycle back in April, where we had, April 2021, where we had a top in March, pullback. It went on another charge to higher prices. It got above the March top in April by 5%, $3,000, and then had a very significant pullback. So it's easy to get super excited for higher prices. I don't want to rain on anyone's parade here and not give them the positive vibes they've all come to expect from cryptocurrency. But if you're worried about your money and you like your money, well, then you'd pay attention to what's going on in the chart and not get too swept up in the emotions of higher prices. Now, that's the short-term outlook for the upside. Should we see some consolidation to then press to higher prices, to push to higher prices, a break above these tops, 71,700, then the all-time high, 73,800, then to get through those resistance levels at 78.5 and 81,500, which is a longer term view here on the weekly chart. So before I get to the weekly, just want to look to the downside here. You get breakdowns of the swing bottoms at 64,300. Well, then we're probably going to come back and test these lows here. That's at 60,700 and the other bottom there at 62,200. So what that means is further closes underneath these tops. Well, then it spells a little bit more downside. Testing these levels and a break, we then test these levels. If that's the case, well, then we head back into the 50s. We don't have any confirmed signs yet. The trend is undecided now on the daily because we have higher highs formed and lower lows formed. So it's an uncertain trend, but the momentum is currently to the upside with that little risky close there, $100 underneath the top of the 27th of March. So that leads us over to the weekly chart. What's going on here? And with that weekly trend up, we can see that there was a similar pattern that happened in the last cycle. There was higher highs, higher lows, but a big thing to note, and this happens over a longer period of time. I know I have to keep explaining this because people are looking at 12 hours and hourly charts, but anyway, look at the period here at the top, 12 bars, that is weeks. That's essentially 3 months, 84 days, 3 months at these highs. The price pushed higher in April and then had a correction. So I'm not ruling anything out. I'm just focused on the charts. And what I'm looking at are the movements to the upside. You can see these moves are getting very small from top to top as the market begins to roll over. So you got $3,400 top to top, basically a 6% move there. And then this top to this top was a 5% move. So you had the gap shortening there with those moves to the upside. Are we seeing something similar this time? We don't have any signs yet of a move higher. So if you start to see the gaps get smaller between tops to top, that could mean that we're seeing some sort of pause, which might be followed with a correction. As I've talked about many times, these moves can take some time. So if we look forward to roughly 12 weeks, 13 weeks, 3 months, that takes us out to June. So we have the halving coming up in less than 2 weeks. Maybe there's a bit of time to pause here and reconsolidate before we start moving higher. And this also falls in line with the other data that we've looked at when it comes to green months for BTC. We've already seen 7 green months. So that's a higher close than an open. And we've got my monthly chart here, 6 months in the same swing. So this only happens 14% of the time where you see 6 months within the same swing of higher highs and higher lows. If we're to get to 7 months, so this one here to push higher in April, to push higher here, it doesn't matter if it closes red, but we would get a 7th month. That only happens 7% of the time. And if it was to go higher again in May, it's never happened before within the same swing. Not saying it can't happen, but it's never happened before, which means then that percentage is basically dropped to 0. Give it 1% chance of it happening in May, where you'd get a higher high and a higher low from April. So in terms of the green months here, 7 months straight is what we've seen in 2012, and we've seen that again in 23 and 24. So April's yet to close. Let's see if we do get to that 8 months of green. But nonetheless, these periods, well, these sort of patterns take time to develop if they are in fact developing into some sort of pause or correction. We've already seen now, in terms of a pause, about 35 days. So within this same trading range between $60,000 and $73,000, we've already seen many, many days there. You could almost count it up as being about 35 to 40 days. So really the price has paused here. The same thing happened back at the ETF. You can see where the price peaked the first week of December, and then we had to move up, we had the correction, and then it lasted about 56 days within that same trading range between $40,000 and $50,000 before it got a move on in first week of Feb. It started to push towards $50,000. Now, on top of the monthly swings coming to a point where the probabilities are starting to get stacked well against us, and also coming to the point where the monthly green versus red, the monthly profit and loss, is also starting to stack against us, we've also seen seasonal turns around this time in the market. So over the course of Bitcoin's entire history, monthly chart here, April, June-ish period, we've got March, April, and June have shown turns before, significant turns in the market. And so throughout each of the cycles, roughly at least twice, you would see a March, April, or June turn before the market pauses and then comes back for more gains. So the cycle's not over. It just typically in the past has shown significant pauses or turns at this stage of the move, or especially at this stage of the year, roughly that March, April, June period of the year. As we're on the monthly chart, this also gives us a good chance to have a look at that next price target. And if we're looking at the 50% level right in here that we just checked out on the weekly chart, it's in there at $81,300. So that price comes from the entire cycle of 2019 into 2021, projected off our current cycle low of 2022, and just run straight up here. That's actually the 100% there at 81,000. The 50% was just this current weekly move. So there's a little bit of price cluster coming in here on larger term timeframes that we need to be aware of. Should the price break through these levels, do we get a price a breakout above that and consolidation above those levels? That's going to be even stronger for Bitcoin should it get there, consolidate above those levels, and then take off again. That's going to be a really, really strong move. Or do we see some sort of rejection and it just comes back to sit within that sort of $50,000 to $80,000 range over the coming months? Still not the worst case scenario. You would not want to see the price go under $48,000. But for now, anything in that sort of mid 50s to high 70s, early 80s is not a bad sign, especially after such a big move, after a 9-month first accumulation zone and then a 7-month reaccumulation zone. Now, the USDT dominance has been a pretty reliable indicator of at least pauses for Bitcoin price and even turns in some examples. Now, I can chuck up the Bitcoin index chart here. So we've got the candles in green and red at the back. That is the Bitcoin price. Gets a little bit messy, but we'll just go through one at a time here. And then on the bars, you've got the USDT dominance on a diagonal uptrend here. Each of the white arrows shows significant peaks for Bitcoin. So you can see going back December 2017, that was the all-time high for Bitcoin, $20,000. That was the first starting point here. Now, each time it's come back to the line, it's been significant turns. That is your June 2019 turn. That was a 300% rise before a 50% collapse, then followed by another roughly 60% collapse from the February top, which is also another point on the diagonal uptrend here. Now, if we take it to the April top, which is something that I've been referencing quite a lot for this particular period for Bitcoin, let's turn this off again just so you can get a better idea. You had January get close to the line, you had February touch the line, you had March touch the line, and you had April touch the line, and then also May touch the line. So you had about 4 to 5 months of timeframes here hitting that line. Now, if I throw the Bitcoin price back on, you can see that January was well down here, and then February put in a big top, big pullback. March also had a pretty big run, and then April started to roll over at that point. So you had less movements from one high to the next. And that's what we've been looking at or keeping an eye on in case we start to see that for Bitcoin at this top, which can last 1, 2, 3, 4 months around this period. It's not to say that Bitcoin is over and the top's in. We're just looking at what the probabilities have shown in the past, especially after such significant runs. So that period lasted for quite some time. That was actually the top there, even though the bottom of the move for the USDT dominance came 2 months earlier. But nonetheless, that was all through that particular period there. And price was roughly around that same level, a big trading range there of, what's it for BTC? $45-ish thousand to the peaks there at $65,000. So a pretty sizable price range there. A sizable trading range, which maybe we see something similar to that occurring now for BTC. Now, moving forward, you had another hit there at the all-time high on the dominance. You had another hit in June and November. You can see it just getting a hit, a little bounce, hit November, December, and came back above. And now we find ourselves in March at the Bitcoin all-time high. So I'm just looking at something like this potentially occurring because it's the most similar to what's happened already with several straight months up, big moves towards the end, and now we find ourselves in April. Layer on top of everything else I've looked at when it comes to seasonal turns, when it comes to extensions of moves, when it comes to short-term outlooks to the upside and price targets for the market to get above, in this case, Bitcoin to get above, and you start to develop a bit of a picture as to how it could be a reasonable time to anticipate maybe a pause or a correction, but not the end of a move. And within that, price can go higher. We can go to 77, 78, 80, 81, as we looked at here with those price ranges. So it really all depends on what type of trader you are, what goals are you going for over this next few months. Is this your period to continue consolidating your portfolio? Are you looking to get out because you think it's over? That is all going to be very, very individual, which is probably why we get such high emotions around whether this market's going to fresh highs or not, people trying to catch the bottoms and catch the tops. That's another reason why we focus a lot on the lows in the market. It's the hardest time for new people to get in, and even veterans that have been around some time, because of the fear at the lows. So moving forward, try to take a chunk of profits out of the middle. Don't worry too much about the exact peaks or the exact bottoms, just somewhere around the lows, somewhere around whatever you think the top might be, or even a little bit of profits along the way to the upside is going to make you a very happy person. All right, guys, we've got a lot to get through over the coming weeks, especially if this price does push higher, to focus on what happens with these patterns moving forward as we head towards those price targets to the upside and the downside that might invalidate any of the movements in the patterns. So make sure you hit subscribe. I'll see you back here at the next video. Until then, take care and peace out.